Hello all, and welcome to the next panel of the virtual summit on AgTech. I am Skylar Dalton, and I'm a first student here at the Tech School of Business. I will be moderating what I hope to be an exciting and illustrative conversation among our esteemed colleagues here on the screen and on the stage. Joining us today is Liz Keehner, who is a venture analyst at AgVentures Alliance, Karen Levert, who's a co-founder of AgTech Ventures and a venture partner at Pappas Capital, and launching Levert Ventures soon, which you'll hear more about. Rebecca Kaufman, who's a senior director at AgLaunch, and Will Coleman, who's a venture partner at ReGen Ventures. And I could introduce them, but I think that they will do a much better job of introducing themselves. So we will go in that same way of introducing, and I will ask Liz to please introduce yourself first.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Skylar, for having me. Glad to be here today. I'm Liz Keehner, venture analyst with AgVentures Alliance. We are a farmer-owned cooperative based in Mason City, Iowa. I am in Des Moines. I was born and raised in rural Iowa, did not grow up on a farm, but was always kind of 2 degrees away from agriculture, as I like to say. And it wasn't until I married my husband that I got a direct kind of relationship with agriculture, as my father-in-law is a farmer. And didn't really get into ag tech until about 3 years ago. We relocated back to Iowa, and I was working with the state of Iowa to deploy some innovation funding into early stage technologies here in the state, and one of those sectors being ag tech, and then landed with AgVentures about a year ago. So glad to be investing in this space. It's exciting.
Thanks, Liz. And Karen, you're up next.
Okay, hello everyone. It's good to be here. I've listened in on some of the conference topics, and they've been great. So congrats to the organizers. So as Skylar mentioned, I'm Karen Levert, and I've been an entrepreneur for maybe longer than these folks have been alive. So a lot of years, over 20 years as an entrepreneur. I started off in corporate America at Nationwide Insurance. I was a programmer there, and then went up through the ranks of systems analysts and got an MBA. And then I was relocated here, and I live in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, to run a 500-person service center for them. And that's when I decided after that, I kind of wanted to do my own thing. And so I met the dean of the School of Engineering at Duke University, 18 years ago. And we started a company called Southeast TechInventures. And we really, and we're focused on university research, getting those technologies into the marketplace. So we did that with Southeast TechInventures. Christina, by the way, now is the president of Ohio State. So she's gone on from this world. But I then started AgTech Adventures. Like Liz, I grew up in the Midwest, not on a farm, but had classmates that were in FFA and had corn and soybean farms around me. And then here in Research Triangle Park, before the consolidation, a lot of the big ag companies were here. And so it made sense to take that innovation model, talk more about that, do it in agriculture. And I realized how difficult it is to fund early stage companies. And that's why I decided to raise a venture fund. So I'm partnered with Pappas Capital now, but we'll be launching Levert Ventures. My last name is French for the green. And so green and early stage, that's what I'm up to right now. So good to be here.
Great, thank you so much. And next up, Rebecca.
Hey, I'm Rebecca Kaufman. I'm a senior director at AgLaunch, and we are based in Memphis, but work throughout the greater Delta region and have now got partnerships across the country, which we'll talk a little bit about as well. But my background is really in policy and research and economic development. I practiced law briefly and have worked with the Delta Regional Authority, which is a small economic development federal agency serving Southern Illinois all the way down to New Orleans in those rural communities. So through that, I learned a lot about this area. We did not do as much economic development with agriculture, which was always a little surprising to me, considering it was the region's greatest asset. So I am excited to be at AgLaunch now. I've been there about 3 or 4 years. talking about the opportunities that the region can capitalize on with our greatest natural resources and human capital as well. I think farmers are fantastic for the most part. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity there that we are, I think, literally hosting a summit about, because there's some really exciting things that are happening and I'm excited to be a part of it.
And last but not least, Will.
Yeah, so Will Coleman, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me. And I'm part of a fund called ReGen Ventures. We're a relatively new early stage venture fund. We came together in the midst of COVID, which is always an interesting time to do anything. But we're really focused on the pre-seed through Series A stage of investing, and we invest in teams that are really going after step function type changes in a sector. So not incremental, really focused on if something scaled, how it could catalyze environmentally regenerative outcomes. And so that's a pretty high bar. It's a little bit unique in the venture space. And so we can get a little bit more into that in a minute. Personally, I come from a venture background and an operating background. I got into the energy and climate space a couple decades ago, and promptly got into the venture space in the first wave of clean tech, which was a learning experience, I think, for all of us. And we looked at everything, did everything from solar through to AgTech companies. And so have seen the early iterations of venture trying to get into AgTech and the evolution to where we are today. I actually was telling Skylar that I remember the first probably venture AgTech trip, which was on a silver bus that somebody I think had originally taken to Burning Man, and it was, we had a purple velour heart in the back, and we toured the Central Valley and met with farmers and went to Basque eating houses to meet with them. And it was, I think for most venture capitalists, it was an education. I'd grown up going to a farm and working on a farm in Idaho, so I had some familiarity with it, but it was, I think it was unique for everybody. And I think so we've come a long way, I think, since then, and it'll be interesting to hear everyone's perspectives.
So on that note, Will, I'd love to ask you to kind of kick us off. We'd love to hear more about ReGen and the investment thesis there and how you guys came together, and if you could dig a little deeper as well into what the not incremental, but these big changes that you're gonna take some swings at. Just share on that if you could.
So ReGen, there's a lot of venture funds coming into the space. I think one of the things that's great about the moment is that there is an incredible amount of capital pouring into climate technologies in particular, but also AgTech in particular. And that's really been spurred obviously by some of the big success stories in the space. And there's sort of alt everything is the motto that I think we're hearing around these days. I don't know that alt everything will work, but I think that there is obviously an enormous amount of opportunity, and the underlying technology behind all of these segments has changed, right? And the advances we've seen in the last decade have enabled folks like us to go after opportunities in the space. And so we're very focused on early stage technologies. This is pre-seed, seed, Series A, just coming to formation. But predominantly folks that have a very clear thesis on how the technology or the business that they're developing is going to catalyze some fundamental change in that marketplace. And so, what the distinction there is if it's something that is, improving the efficiency of agriculture by some incremental amount, 20, 30, 40%, it might be huge relative to the baseline that we're seeing. It's still not something that necessarily fits our lens. Our focus is more on things that can fundamentally shift the way we grow food or the way we consume food or what food is. We look at companies like Meaty and Galley and, companies that are thinking about, I suppose vertical farming would probably fall into that, but you got to make it economic and have it actually work. And so there's a lot of ways in which that plays out. And what it means for us is obviously that we're not just looking at AgTech, we're looking across a bunch of different segments. And so it means that we have a pretty high bar in terms of what we're looking for. But one of the main things we do is we apply this regenerative filter when we're looking at companies to really understand whether the existence of this company can catalyze a regenerative state for that segment.
Very cool. Rebecca, you probably have like the most unique approach to all of this. Although each person on this call is approaching this from a different lens and a creative one. Could you dive into like the how and the why of the AgLaunch model, and just like what are you guys up to over at AgLaunch? Rebecca, you're on mute.
Man, I was that person. So that's quite the introduction. So at AgLaunch, we really talk a lot about our farm-centric innovation model. For those on the call who are not familiar with what that means, really we're just trying to put farmers at the center of this innovation and making sure they're engaged really early in these processes, whether it's a new crop that's being scaled or it's a new technology that's trying to get to market. We're saying we should be having partners in farmers and not treating them just as customers at the back end. So get their input early. So really what we have done, we have an accelerator, we have a lot of really great programming, but at the heart of what we have done is created a farmer network of early adopter farmers. So folks who, we joke, these are farmers who have in their farm shops a whole room of sensors that they've been trying for 20 and 30 years because they're just kind of like geeks in a lot of ways. So these are folks who have been really thinking about how to be more efficient, or where is ag headed? How do they get ahead of it? How are they, making their bottom line a little better, which I think is kind of what we're all looking at, right? And so what we have done is created a network where those folks are screening companies for our accelerator. They're looking at deals, and then we cut them in on it. As part of our accelerator, we do take a small equity stake in those companies as, a fee for service. And then we basically give that to the farmers. So they have skin in the game. They are running trials early and often with these companies on their farms. So they're getting real feedback. The companies, the startups, are getting real feedback from farmers. Sometimes it's really sophisticated. Sometimes it's as simple as, I don't know, the headpiece for this piece of technology I'm supposed to wear doesn't work in the heat. It falls out of my head every time I'm sweating, or it's hard to get the notes down, or whatever it is. So some pretty practical pieces of information that these companies can then take into account, develop version 2.0, and then go raise a lot of money and hopefully scale that way. So we try to put farmers kind of on the R&D development teams of these companies early on. It's kind of where we are.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca. And Karen, would love to hear from you, whether it's about kind of the vision for Levert or the work that you did and continue to do at AgTI.
Yeah, sure. So the reason I decided to launch Levert Ventures was really because of the work at AgTI and Southeast TechInventures, so AgTech Ventures. So that business model, and maybe because I started the first one with a dean of a university, there are just great technologies that are in the university research labs, and they end up being too early for venture to invest in and too early for industry to license. And so the business model around AgTech Ventures really is to partner with scientific founders. And they usually are in universities, but they don't have to be. And if they aren't in a university, they look like someone that's in a university typically. And so very broad in AgTech Ventures, in ag biotech to precision ag. And so we've got several portfolio companies there. The main thing that we want to do is fill an industry need, though. So we have a number of partnerships with industry so that we can make sure we're starting something or starting a company that really has a need in the marketplace. And so that's the AgTech Ventures model. Levert Ventures, Will's a little bit ahead of us because we're not going to do a first close until this summer. But we're really going to be focused too on early stage. So I'm thrilled to hear that they are too. Seed and early stage. The angel investors, Liz, they're playing there now, and the Rebecca, the folks are helping get companies there, but we've got to have the money to put in. And so we're going to focus as a venture fund in precision ag, indoor farming, not necessarily the infrastructure, but tools and technologies inside the facility. And then also crop improvement. That's kind of broad, but that's where we want to play. So that could be biologicals all the way to some ag biotech, but not a lot of regulatory work because it's an early stage fund.
Great. And Liz, explain to us the AgVentures Alliance model.
Yeah, so we're very similar to AgLaunch in that we're putting the farmer first. So we're not structured as a standard venture fund. Since we are a farmer-owned cooperative, we're making direct investments that directly impact the farmer. And our mission is to increase farm profitability. So we're also early stage. We're typically investing about $100,000 into a pre-seed or seed round. And then we do allocate some follow-on capital for companies in our portfolio that go on to raise additional funds. Our farmer network really is based around the Midwest, mostly in Iowa and southern Minnesota. So our farmers are your standard corn, soybean farmers. We've got some livestock producers as well. So really we're looking at things like, inputs, biologicals, genetics, fertilizers, farm management, robotics, and artificial intelligence and things like that. It's a little bit different in that, really we're thinking about these investments as kind of we're a third-party R&D, right? You've got Corteva, Bayer, Syngenta, all allocating about 5 to 7% of their annual budgets towards R&D, but the farmer is not thinking about their business in that way. And so we like to think of ourselves as kind of that third-party R&D to help kind of de-risk some of those technologies that we can get in the hands of farmers.
And Liz, who's making the investment decisions at your firm? Is it like a bunch of bankers, or what does that look like?
No. So you're looking at half of our investment team. So it's myself, and we've got one other person at AgVentures, but ultimately it's our farmers that are making the decision. So the way that it works is, our investment team is, of course, doing the early vetting, making sure that it's something that aligns with our goals and our mission. And then ultimately the proposal goes to an investment committee that is made up of farmers and our members, and they are the ones ultimately approving those investment recommendations.
And is that is that strategy working for y'all?
Yeah, it works very well because you are getting direct feedback from the customers that would ultimately be using these technologies. So they're telling you, whether or not there's value in the company. So yeah, absolutely.
Super cool. So I'm going to bounce back over to you, Will. When you guys are evaluating startups and understanding that you're pretty early in that process for this next venture of yours, but what are you guys going to be looking for to de-risk? Because it's going to be so, you're probably not going to have 3 years of revenue that points to a success trajectory. So how are you guys planning to evaluate for a good investment versus a riskier one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a mix of art and science, but it's particularly at the early stage, it's kind of like one of those, if you live on the East Coast, a hurricane chart where landfall is somewhere in this area. But it's, when we are a traditional venture fund in our model. And so, as an early stage seed Series A venture fund, there's a certain physics that is played out. So in terms of the returns of the portfolio, the expectations of the number of companies that'll actually survive, we do hope and we do claim that the way that we do investing, we expect fewer zeros. We really do want to support companies that are building incremental value as they go. But as I mentioned, because our bar is seeking these systemic changes, these companies that can really fundamentally transition, there will be significant risk. And so what we're really evaluating is like a classical early stage venture fund, right? There's three critical attributes because of that. The first is you have to have very clear and very solid knowledge of a large disruptible market. So it's not enough to kind of have a TAM that is massive and say, see, it's huge. It's really, how do you think about the segmentation of that, and where in this does that product that you're proposing actually fit, and tell us why it wins in that space. And wins means you got to be able to get to hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue in the lifespan of the company, with a huge upside from there, right? That has to be the beginning, because these companies are all valued based on their forward potential. And so that's number one. And number two is, because it's early, you're not going to have validation, as you mentioned, of all of these components, but you have to have a really strong company thesis that is about how this could actually viably compete and transform that market. And so, typically in this space in particular, that requires some pretty deep market knowledge. It's people who have come out of the space, understand the space in some way, have really strong advisors who are helping them navigate it. There's a lot of complexity in the ag space, and sometimes something that looks like an obvious opportunity, there's a reason it's been sort of underdeveloped for a couple decades. And so that's number two is the sort of clarity of thesis. And then number three is obviously team, and how that team brings some sort of asymmetric capability or insight that we believe can go and deliver on that thesis. It's some of that is domain experience. It can also be the ability to deliver, the proven ability to deliver. And then there's a whole set of less tangible things you're looking for in entrepreneurs. And then, the final thing is more of a firm level thing, which is we always ask the question of, is it regenerative? And, again, this is a high bar. We recognize that it's something that we're looking for, and it's really about, can it enable that world at scale, or does it catalyze that outcome at scale, if broadly adopted?
Great. And then we just got a question from Connie Bowen in the chat. And so I'm going to put this one onto you, Will. And the question is, where do y'all think VC is not a fit for ag, especially as it relates to transitioning to regenerative?
This could be a long conversation. It's a great question. There's a lot of places, and to be honest, it's hard to know exactly which until you see it. This is one of the things we try and bring to this, because the nice part about having seen an evolution over a couple decades is you have a certain amount of kind of built up pattern recognition and also scar tissue. The bad part is you also have scar tissue, and so we have talked about as a firm how you bring a learning mentality to it, and I think there's often places that for whatever reason it seems like you could never do a venture investment in that space. It's just it's more of a development type deal, or it is something that's going to have an extraordinarily long adoption cycle, and for instance, new crop traits can be those kinds of things, depending on what they are. But then you unpack it, and this team has figured out that there's a way to accelerate all of that, and there's a way to get around it. It's what everybody else in this call is doing is so critically important to how you compress that timeline to make something a venture investable opportunity. I think the one place for us, and the way to think about it, is if it's the incremental additions to efficiency, as I mentioned before, are things that are really hard for us to do, just because they don't, there's so much fragmentation in the market, and adoption is slow, and we think those things will not win out over time. There'll be a slow sort of evolution, and that's just not a venture sort of time scale and outcome. Yeah. So there's a lot of other places. I hate to go and say we don't do this, because somebody will show up at the front door and say, hey, look, I can do it. So
yeah, no, I think that makes a ton of sense, and thank you for sharing. Rebecca, y'all, I feel comfortable saying for sure have picked companies that are like fully pre-prototype. In that instance, like,
A few.
what are you investing in? Like, what are you making that pick based on?
Similar to Will, like, I mean, the potential. I think we're like, if we could get this going and we could do this, our farmers are telling us they would use it, they would adopt it. And so how do we do that? And it's actually in some ways better to have those companies in that stage coming through, because we're able to partner them with some farmers who have the expertise, have the know-how, the willingness, and the experience to say, I can help you there, or I've done this in the past, or here's how we could set it up to where people like me would use it and adopt it. And so that's kind of been fun. We do work with companies across the board, and so we have different entry points into the farmer network and kind of farmer support along the way. But some of those really early companies, it's been fun to say, could you build it like this? Or actually what you're proposing doesn't sound great at all, but if it could do X, Y, and Z, I'd be very interested. And so it allows for some early pivot and feedback that you may not get, and you're too far down the road, right?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Karen, as you're looking at technologies and sometimes kind of picking from a couple to merge together into a super technology, what does that process look like for you, and how do you make those decisions?
So we didn't do it right in the beginning. So just to add a little bit more to that, so on the AgTech Adventures side, we could be looking at things that are just an idea. And we do a lot of the, hopefully folks have heard of SBIR, the Small Business Innovation Research. That's usually, that was the first kind of line of defense for us. Like, we've got to get a grant in and see if we can get some money for prototype development. And then just over the years, we've developed a number of university relationships. And so back to when I said before, we've got these industry partners and we talk to them and they may say, oh, this is a need in the marketplace. Well, we have about 100 university relationships. We can touch base with those universities. And then that's where the bundling can come in, because if we find a couple of researchers working on, in a similar areas, then we'll license the intellectual property, add our own IP, and then form a company. But it's more, again, when I said we didn't do it right the first time, we would kind of be more reactive of inventors coming to us with the best thing since sliced bread. And it was, we didn't necessarily always build something that companies had an interest in. So flipping that on its head and then going out to the universities has been really the way to do that. So hopefully I answered your question.
That's helpful. And would love to hear from you more about this. This call to me represents kind of pieces of the early stage venture ecosystem in the ag space. Would love to hear from you, Karen. Like, what do these like super nascent companies that are just a technology, a researcher, or just a technology and a CEO, like, what are the ingredients in a recipe for success to get from something out of your shop to Series B?
Yeah, so Will mentioned earlier, even though you have a really great technology, for us, the team is super important. We don't necessarily have the inventors become the CEOs. A lot of times if we're getting or looking at technologies in the universities, a lot of the tenured professors, they don't want to go into the company, so we license that out and build a team around it. But there are a lot of founders that are super CSOs, chief scientific officers, that we just love having them remain connected with the company. So with those folks, along with the CEOs and the rest of the management team, I mean, you hear people say all the time, you can kind of take a mediocre technology and a super team and they'll make it work. But if you don't have a great team, at the end of the day, it's going to be tough. So still, though, we get back to making sure we're filling a market need, which shifts over the years. I think when we started, 10 years ago in the ag space, it's different than things that we could be looking at now. And it's really just being close to where you want to go at the end of the day. In our world, we want to start companies that a larger company purchases. Most of our companies aren't going to go the IPO route for its realization or exit. And so it's super important to have those relationships on the industry side so that we really can be getting companies that we can move through with their help sometimes. I mean, they write letters of support for the grants and then help us with what 3 things do we need to demonstrate to get to the next level. And then our next level is, can we get some seed financing around it? And then we start talking to later stage investors, because even if you get seed money, if you can't get that next round, you're in trouble. So it's a series of gates that we take the technology through. And I love teams, people that have had some struggles, have had to have obstacles in their lives, because they have, if you can see that someone's fought through something, they'll continue to do that. So that's super important to me.
Okay, I think I'm off mute now. Liz, would love to hear. I know that you and your team at AgVA have quite a strong relationship and partnership with the folks at AgLaunch, and then also have worked some with Karen's team, and hopefully in the future we'll work closely with Will's team. And so would love to hear from you, kind of what does the early stage ag tech investment ecosystem look like, and like kind of what's the state of the state, if you will?
Yeah, so I would say that from my perspective, and Karen alluded to this a little bit earlier, is that there aren't really truly anyone who's investing in that kind of pre-seed seed stage. They may say they are, but I think the reason we can come into this space confidently is because of the farmer network that we have backing us, honestly. And then we've partnered with AgLaunch's program. A lot of times, if we come across companies that are pre-prototype, we encourage them to go through a program like AgLaunch's, and then we would make an investment afterwards. So we lean on our networks down and up the chain. But I'm really happy to see more funding opportunities like Will's and Karen's funds coming on board to this space. I was actually just at a conference with universities, just listening to the technologies that they've got coming out of their programs, and we were one of the only ones there from a funding perspective that were truly investing at that early stage. So I'm excited to see more people joining.
And would be happy to hear from any of you. Is there any type of kind of formal or semi-formal pipeline of, we've got y'all at the beginning and then kind of moves up through these stages, and here's who you can expect to reach out to when you have a licensed technology versus when you're trying to raise $20 million? Does that exist even kind of theoretically? Rebecca, maybe you could touch on that.
Well,
Karen's here.
Too.
Even better.
I don't think I was moving fast enough. I used to think my tombstone was going to say, "Where's my phone?" Now I'm convinced it's going to say, "You're on mute." Okay, I got to get off it. So. Now I forgot the question. No, so you were talking about like a pipeline, right? So,
yeah.
I always encourage, again, if you're looking at SBIR and STTR, the tougher part about the grant programs are a lot of money's going into the NIH. So you've got something attached to a molecule or a device. it's a lot easier. And on the ag side, you've got NSF and USDA. NSF is really good. You know, they'll match monies that you bring in. They're I think the toughest to hit though. They really want to have a team together and, you know, really have a commercialization plan. So, and then USDA is good, but they have really small dollars. So you really have to, I always say, wherever you are, you've got to find at the very earliest levels what kind of economic development potential funding that you could have. It could be like here, we have the Biotech Center. There's the NC IDEA Foundation here. So I always encourage entrepreneurs to, especially in your local community, that's where you're going to get the most support. And then when you start going up the food chain a little bit with investors, again, in your area are the best. And then you've got to get networked into there. So you just have to find a way. And then you get to the early stage investors. Again, got to get their attention usually through intros, and then you've got, you know, the Cultivians and Middle Land Capitals that are out there, Lewis and Clark, a little bit further along. So it's really understanding if you're knocking on a door of an investor where you don't fit, it's tough. You know, you really have to take the time, look on their websites, look at the type of companies they've invested in the past to make sure that that you're aligning. You've got AgLaunch too to help kind of in, I guess I'll call it Central America, right, of US, that could be helpful. But anyway, there's no one continuum. I think different states try to put things in place, but I really want to make sure, and this is just for that people don't have to have an intro to get to us. So I'm telling you in the future, like a website that you check these things. If you check these things, I don't care if you don't know someone or know me or someone that I know, because I think that's how we break down some of the barriers of funding. But you got to be able to check those boxes and make sure you're a fit, and then we'll definitely take a meeting there. So hopefully we'll see more of that moving forward.
Yeah, the only thing I would add on top of that is that I think that it's really the challenging part with ag tech is just it's such a broad category, right? And so, you know, it's everything from people doing, you know, on the one end crop traits, and on the other end drones optimizing the way nutrients are deployed, to, you know, logistics and analytics software, right? And so those all have a very different path through the pipeline of funding. And I think that's the hardest thing for any entrepreneur to figure out is, I think, you know, Liz is totally right. For a certain subset of those folks, there's a total dearth of investors. And I think, you know, those happen to most often do with things that are closer to the farmer, right? They're things that are often, you know, crops, you know, new hybrids, things that take a long time to pilot and test, and many harvest cycles, right? And so I think that's where there's a gap. But then you start to get to later stage, you know, the early stage is a real mishmash, and then you get to later stage, and each fund, whether it's S2G or whether it's Cultivian or what have you, has a certain bent on what matters to them in the market and what kinds of companies they're doing. One might be more CPG end products, one might be more software and analytics, one might be more around crop sciences, right? Because it's got a bio background. So it's a pretty big canvas, but I think Karen's point about just do your homework and try and figure out what folks have already invested in and what their point of view is. They'll probably say it publicly, is really important.
That's great. And so as we're talking about kind of the breadth of the different technologies and companies in this industry, we have a great question from the audience. And of time, we have about 5 more minutes left. So if everyone could quickly, we can do a little bit of a round robin. What's a company or a trend or a theme that you guys or your firm is especially excited about right now? And we can take like a 3-second deep breath, and then would love for you guys just to kind of quick fire, like, what are we excited about?
One for me, I love the AI ML. I've got a IT background, but I think you take an industry like ag that's as old as man, right? And all of the data, and our problem, when there's a flip side to this too, because we've been pushing data that doesn't really make sense. And data for data's sake is no good, but we do have an ability to collect and learn, and using the tools that we have today in AI and ML, I don't even think we can imagine sitting here, the tremendous potential that we have moving forward. And the second is around gene editing. I feel, with the CRISPRs and Talons and MAB technologies, it's going to change. I mean, we started off with this GMO, horrible name, putting genetically modified, and if everyone knew what we ate every day, they wouldn't have as much of an issue. But the gene editing, I think they're heading in the right place, just from a political standpoint. So I think that's a game changer as well, just because of that.
Yeah, I would say synthetic biology. I think it's what's happening in the synthetic biology world over the last decade is remarkable, and it's back in my old firm, we had invested in a platform called Pacific Biosciences, which was doing sequencing, and it was, we watched as the cost to sequence the human genome went from tens of millions of dollars down to thousands of dollars, and it was just to see that and what it then unlocked and enabled was incredible, and we've seen that plus all the things happening, on modified organisms, and it's just mind-boggling. We looked at a company the other day that had gotten to 2 different cell lines on $60,000 in funding. I mean, it's that wasn't possible 5 to 10 years ago, and so I think what we're then going to see as a result is, it's not all to everything, but it's definitely all certain things that are really challenging and really bad for the environment or bad for health or what have you. And how do we start to use different kinds of materials and inputs to produce products that are more ecologically balanced and regenerative. And so I think it's just, we're at the beginning of that. Fascinating time.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that Karen and Will have said. Regenerative ag is a very exciting transition that we're seeing, and more farmers are starting to adopt, something that I'm personally passionate about. Anything from precision ag to knowing exactly what that one plant's health is, and all the nutrient composition and soil composition, and then things like natural pesticides, like eliminating cornworm through just gene editing. So things like that. And then, of course, robotics and autonomy are important to us because labor is a really huge problem in this, in agriculture. And so tackling that is important to us as well.
That was going to be what I said, Liz. So thanks for jumping in there ahead of me. But I'm just going to echo what everybody has said. When we're talking about new varieties, when we're talking about gene editing and things like that, like the first thing that I kind of think about is how are we going to get it out of the field if we do scale it outdoors? And so that's where in my head, we're going to have like robots picking kiwis in Mississippi, which is like, maybe. And like, that's pretty crazy to kind of think about. And so we're going to be looking at robotics pretty heavily in the next year. So I'm pretty excited about that.
I love that wild future that you've painted for us, Rebecca. So thank you. If you guys in the audience are interested more in what's like the future of ag, we have our pitch competition closing us out tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern. So stick around for that. Thank you so much to this esteemed group of panelists and colleagues. I'm so appreciative of each of you for taking time to sit with me and chat for 45 minutes about this great, exciting, wild place that we work.
Thanks so much, Skylar.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks all.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.